Very proud of our student ministry here at Grace Bible Church and how they're leading students to worship the Lord and ultimately giving them opportunities to lead us in worshiping the Lord. And so I'm very grateful for that. We've been going through the book of Ecclesiastes. We're going to continue looking in that book today. If you're not familiar with the book of Ecclesiastes, I read something that just defines it really well. The book of Ecclesiastes is the only book of the Bible that was written on Monday morning, okay? So what that means is that Solomon was not in the best of moods when he wrote this book. And he was dealing with just a lot of dissatisfaction in his life. He was not happy with what he had or where he was or what was going on in his life and the way he perceived life in general. He was just not very satisfied with how things were going. And so you got to keep that in mind as we're going through the book of Ecclesiastes, because that kind of sets the mood or the tone for the things that he's writing and why he's writing and sharing these things. Before we get into today's passage, I did something this past week because happiness is important to all of us. In fact, let me just do a quick poll. Who in here wants to be happy? 100%. If you didn't raise your hand, you need to go see somebody else. I can't help you this morning, okay? Everybody wants to be happy. We're all trying very hard to be happy. And so as a result of this, I just did a quick Google search this past week, and this is what I typed in: how to create happiness. And Google tells us there are 687 million articles that will tell you how to be happy. That's 3 articles for every adult in the United States. That's how many articles are written. The very first one, the one that's at the very top of the search, comes from the New York Times, and it is simply titled, How to Be Happy. And it shares 5 things, 5 practices that people can do to increase happiness in their life. The first one is conquer negative thinking. Second is use controlled breathing. Just hyperventilate and you'll feel better. Write in a journal for 15 minutes a day. Exercise. And practice optimism. There it is, folks. Thanks for coming to Grace. That's all you got to do. Go out there and learn how to breathe right. Go buy you a nice notebook and start writing down what's going on during your day. According to this article, these 5 things are the things that you and I can do, that we could try to create happiness in our life. Here's the problem. The problem is that those things in and of themselves are not bad. Don't misunderstand me. Nothing wrong with journaling and exercising and, breathing properly. There's nothing wrong with any of that stuff. But here's the thing. Humans simply cannot create their own happiness. If we could, we would have already done it. Isn't that right? We would have already done this if we could do it, to create happiness for ourselves. We can't architect our own happiness. We can't do it because many times our happiness, what we're trying to build in our lives, is dependent upon circumstances. And we have no control over circumstances. Circumstances are constantly changing in our life, no matter how hard we try to control them, no matter how hard we try to stay on top of them, no matter how we schedule or what kind of things we try to build, habits we try to build into our lives or habits that we try to change. The one thing that we have no control over whatsoever is the circumstances in our life. And for most humans, happiness is controlled by their circumstances. If everything is going their way like they want it to go, most people are happy. But if something changes and they can't control what's going on, it's out of their control, many times that is what tears down their happiness. And Solomon is dealing with that in this passage that we're going to look at together this morning. He names 4 things that really interfere with our ability to make ourselves happy. 4 things that are out of our control. 4 things that are circumstances for which we can't change. And no matter how hard we try to change them, We can't. And so if those things are going to be a part of our life, what can we do to still try to be happy? And that's what I want us to think about as we spend this time together this morning. We're looking at Ecclesiastes chapter 4, and in this chapter he shares 4 roadblocks to self-made happiness. And the first one is oppression. Oppression. Oppression is something we like to maybe rant about on social media. Maybe it's something that when we're sitting around the table talking to people that we say, oh, those kinds of things shouldn't be going on. But it's not something that really many people get involved in. Look at what he says about oppression. He said, again, I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. Now, when he uses that phrase, under the sun, he's talking about a perspective. He's looking at things and not looking through a filter of faith. Okay? In other words, he is providing the very best wisdom and advice and knowledge that man can come up with. He's not trying to involve the Lord in thinking about oppression. He's just looking at oppression from, I would say, from a realist point of view. Someone said something to me last week that in a previous message I said something about, like, there's people that's when they see a glass that's half full or half empty, the optimist looks at it and says, oh, that glass is half full. The pessimist looks at it and says, oh, that glass is half empty. The realist just looks at a glass. They just see it for what it is. And that's what Solomon is doing as he looks at oppression. He from a very human standpoint, he's just looking at oppression. And he says, I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter. Power was on the side of their oppressors. They have no comforter. Oppressed, it means those who are being exploited, those who are vulnerable, those who are powerless, and they're being crushed by other people. Not by necessarily nature or things, but no, it's people crushing other people. And I know here in the United States, we live very privileged lives. You would not know that by watching our social media outlets, but I can tell you, if you were to leave this country and if you were to go to some other places in the world, you would come home very grateful for where you live, and you would stop complaining so much about things. That would happen to all of us. But I can tell you, children, women, and the elderly are the most oppressed people in the world. Those who are oppressed did not choose to be oppressed. They didn't do something to bring misfortune into their life, to bring oppression into their life. Sometimes we excuse ourselves from people's oppression by saying, well, you know what? If they weren't behaving that way, they wouldn't be treated that way. That is not what oppression is. Oppression is, they did not choose it, they did not do anything to be in it, and there's nothing they can do to get out of it. It's completely out of their control. Solomon says, I've seen this. And from a perspective of no faith, he says, they have no comforter. There is no one to comfort them in their oppression. He goes on to say, and I declared that the dead who had already died are happier than the living who are still alive. But better than both is the one who has never been born, who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun. Probably the most bleak verses in all of the Bible. Solomon, in essence, is saying there are some things in this world worse than death, and it's being oppressed. It's being in that position where someone in powerful positions are making decisions that turn people into dust. And they can't get out of it. They can't get out of it. I would dare say that most of us, if not all of us sitting here, some watching online, have never experienced this. The oppression that Solomon is talking about. But I would also say that when you come to Grace Bible Church on some Sundays and you see a refugee walking around, you're looking at someone who's been oppressed. You're looking at someone who's been in that position where powerful people were making decisions that literally turned their life to dust. And they were able to escape. They weren't able to change it. They were able to escape it. Being oppressed and seeing oppression keeps us from building our own happiness. Most of us, again, wouldn't know that because most of us truly have not been oppressed. But seeing oppression should keep us from experiencing happiness. The problem that I encounter and probably that you encounter is that we live in a world that shows us so many things that are going wrong that after a while we get desensitized to it. And we have to build up excuses to explain what we're seeing on TV or what we're seeing on the internet and build up some kind of excuse that makes us feel better, because if we didn't, we would be crushed all the time. Listen, the human heart was not designed to bear the amount of information that we now have. It just simply wasn't. You want to know why so many people are full of anxiety, full of depression and sadness? It's because we have so much information at our fingertips that if we feel anything, we're going to feel sadness and anger and rage and out of control. And that's what Solomon is feeling as he looks at the oppression in the world. He says, I don't get it. I look at what's going on to things, to people in the world, and it burdens him. It burdens him. And so you and I, we're in the same situation. We too see what's going on in our world. We too see things that burden us. We either make callous excuses or we just don't watch. We stick our head in the sand and say it's not happening, or we curl up in a fetal position and cry ourselves to sleep. We all see what's going on. How do we overcome that? The Bible tells us how. Solomon doesn't tell us here. We have to look at some extra verses. But I want to tell you, if you want to overcome this roadblock in your life, you must join God in defending the oppressed. If you want to overcome this in your life, you and I must be willing to join God in defending the oppressed. Listen, the only way you and I can join God is through Jesus Christ. You need to know that up front. That's the only way we can join Him. Being a part of a hashtag movement, ranting on social media, wearing a t-shirt that pronounces something you don't disagree with, that's not joining God. We join God through Jesus Christ, and we do something with Him to push back against oppression. That's how we overcome this roadblock to happiness in our life. You see, for many of us, unfortunately, oppression for most Americans, especially Americans that are well off, it's the idea that, I didn't get the bank loan. I didn't get the raise. I didn't get the promotion. Somebody else they like better got it. I'm being oppressed. And he said, that's not oppression. Listen, that's a bad day, okay? I give it to you. That's a bad day. It's a bad thing that happened. But that is not oppression. Oppression is when people do things that turn other people into objects that can be thrown away. That's oppression. to help the oppressed is what God calls us to do, to join him in doing that. And in doing it, we actually find happiness in our own life. I'm going to show you that in just a moment from the scriptures, that in joining God, in defending the oppressed, we actually tear down this roadblock and allow happiness into our own lives as we walk with God. But let me tell you something, and this may be hard to hear for some in this room, for some watching online. If you do nothing to help the oppressed that are within your reach, and that's important to remember, if you do nothing to help the oppressed that are within your reach, you are the oppressor. That's true for all of us. If we do nothing to help the oppressed that are within our reach, we become the oppressor. You say, well, I don't understand, Pastor Kerry. How can I help the oppressed? I was trying to think of just some really practical things just for people right here that go to Grace Bible Church that are within our reach. The first one that comes to mind, obviously, is the International Welcome Center. Anyone the International Welcome Center is serving is someone who has been oppressed. Anyone. But if that doesn't scratch where you're itching, the next thing that comes to my mind immediately right here within our reach is the hundreds, literally thousands of children that are stuck within government care, that need foster parents, that need adoptive parents. Those are all within our reach right here in Summit County. Those are just two things that come to mind quickly. And to not help them when we could help them makes us the oppressor. But when we join God in pushing back against those who are oppressed within our reach, look at what happens. In Isaiah 58, God, this is just a powerful passage about what God desires from his people when it comes to those who are being oppressed. It says in verse 6, "No, this is the kind of fasting I want." This is God speaking through the prophet Isaiah. Now, fasting is not, for you and I, fasting is probably not something that many of us practice a whole lot of. But in biblical context, fasting was something that they did a lot in biblical Palestine. Fasting is nothing more than giving up something to be and do something with God, to be closer to God and to do something with God. So that's what fasting is. It's a religious activity. It was pretty popular in biblical Palestine, and people would actually brag about their fasting. Look at what I give up to be close to God. Look what I'm doing to be close to God. And so God is dealing with this. For you and I, fasting is just, it's the equivalent of a religious activity. It's the idea of saying, what would you and I give up to help the oppressed? What would you and I give up? And so look at what he says. "No, this is the kind of fasting I want. Free those who are wrongly imprisoned. Lighten the burden of those who work for you. Let the oppressed go free and remove the chains that bind people. Share your food with the hungry and give shelter to the homeless. Give clothes to those who need them, and do not hide from relatives who need your help." So he's laying out all these different forms of oppression that are happening, the things that we see going on around us that we choose to ignore or walk away from or say, that's nothing I can do. And then he says, but look, if you really want to do so, if you really want to walk with me, if you really want to be with God in doing something, do these things. And then notice what happens. Then your salvation will come like the dawn, and your wounds will quickly heal. Well, that kind of sounds like happiness. Don't you like it when your wounds get healed? Don't you feel better? Doesn't salvation mean something when you're experiencing it? It feels different. Look at what he says. Your godliness will lead you forward, and the glory of the Lord will protect you from behind. Then you will call, the Lord will answer, yes, I am here. He will quickly reply. That sounds like happiness to me. That sounds like happiness. He goes on to say, remove the heavy yoke of oppression. Stop pointing your finger and spreading vicious rumors. Feed the hungry and help those in trouble. But notice what the result is. Then your light will shine out from the darkness, and the darkness around you will be as bright as noon. Sounds like happiness. The Lord will guide you continually, giving you water when you are dry and restoring your strength. That sounds like happiness. You will be like a well-watered garden, like an ever-flowing spring. Some of you will rebuild the deserted ruins of your cities. Then you will be known as a rebuilder of walls and a restorer of homes. That sounds like happiness. I'm going to say something I may regret. I think I'm right. I hope I just say it the right way. When it comes to oppression, I don't think God gives a rat's rear end what we're passionate about. You see, that's what drives a lot of us. When it comes to oppression, we get involved in the things we're passionate about. And oppression is not about you and I picking what we are passionate about. Oppression is about obedience and opportunity. That God places us near someone being oppressed, and out of obedience and out of opportunity, we respond. And we join God through Christ in helping those we can reach and help in His name. And He doesn't really care if we're passionate about it or not. Do you follow what I'm saying? You know, I hear people say sometimes, you know, that something will come up, and I'll use IWC as an example, just as an example. Someone saying, well, yeah, I'm just not passionate about that. You think that's going to hold water when you stand before the Lord? Do you and I think that really is going to matter when we stand before Him and say, you know, He looks at us and He says, I placed these people right here, right here. They were like your neighbors. They were like right here. Oh yeah, Lord, but I just wasn't passionate about that. I cared about dolphins. You know, I cared about this over here that I couldn't touch. It was 1,000,000 miles away, but I wore T-shirts. And I joined hashtag movements. Every once in a while, I'd say something on social media to let people know how much I care about this thing that I have nothing to do with. I'm not touching anyone there. You and I, if we would learn to join God in helping the oppressed that we can actually reach, we would experience a lot more happiness in our lives. That's what Solomon is talking about. He goes on to mention another roadblock that many of us encounter, and it's personal motivation. Ecclesiastes 4:4-6 says, and I saw all the toil and all the achievements spring from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. He's talking about the overachiever here. He's talking about the person who says, I want what others have. And so they're overachieving, they're motivated, but their motivation is envy. It's like a bunch of Joneses trying to keep up with the Joneses. I want more, and I'm motivated to do more so I can have more. They're not trying to be productive. They're not trying to be helpful. They're trying to have more. He says that won't make us very happy. In fact, if you want to turn the American dream into a nightmare, just try to have more. Just try to have more. And then he goes on to talk about the other end of the spectrum. He says, fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. So now he's talking about the underachiever. He's talking about the person that doesn't do anything. The underachiever is the complacent or lazy person. They're motivated by ease. They're motivated by comfort. And literally he says they ruin themselves. It's an interesting phrase because it means they eat their own flesh. The person who says, I just want to have fun. I just want to have a good time. I don't want any drama in my life. I'm just going to stay under the radar. I'm not. I'll just squeak by. He says, this person's a fool, and they're literally eating themselves. It's a slow, comfortable path to self-destruction, idleness. When we become idle people who just fall back and say, I'm not going to be engaged in anything. Idle people, they eat away at what they have. First of all, they start losing what they have, and then they eat away at their own self-respect, and then ultimately it eats away at their own ability to care for other people. And Solomon says that they're a fool because ultimately what happens is they end up loathing the normal responsibilities of life. They just hate the normal responsibilities. You see, the overachiever, that person has no leisure time. The underachiever has no productive time. So is there somewhere in between? Is there something in the middle? He goes on to say, look at what Solomon says, but better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. So he's describing a person who doesn't get involved in the rat race to have more, and at the same time, it's a person who says, I don't loathe the normal responsibilities of life. I realize I need to be a normal, productive person. And he brings up this word, tranquility. Tranquility literally means content. Peace and content. If you and I, if we want to overcome this roadblock of self-motivation, of being an overachiever or feeling like I'm not doing enough, or this idea of I need to back off, I shouldn't do so much. If you want to find somewhere in the middle is called contentment. Learn to be content with what we have and be content with the responsibilities that we have in our life. See, that's what's huge about contentment. Contentment's not just being content with the stuff that we have. Contentment is also about being at peace with our station in life, with the responsibilities that God has given us, and we do those to the very best of our ability. We don't loathe them. We don't try to get out of them. We don't try to pass them off to somebody else. This is my station in life. This is what God has asked me to do. I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. Not because I want more, but because I'm content with where He has me. And I'm doing what He's created me to do. Look at what Paul wrote in Philippians, because again, Solomon is not necessarily talking about how do we overcome this problem. He's just pointing out the problem. Don't you hate those people who come to you and all they have is problems and they have no solutions? That's Solomon in Ecclesiastes. He's just pointing out the problems. He hasn't got to any solutions yet. So for you and I to find the solution, we've got to look somewhere else in the scriptures. And Paul wrote in Philippians, he had a lot to say about contentment. He said, I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. Paul says that I've learned it. You and I can learn to be content. We can learn to be content with what we have. We can learn to be content with our station in life where God has placed us and said, these are the responsibilities I have for you. And whether we have a lot or a little, we can be content in those moments. He goes on to say, Paul wrote in 1 Timothy, but godliness with contentment is great gain. That sounds like happiness. That's what that sounds like. He goes on to describe another roadblock Solomon does in this passage. It's the roadblock of self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency. Look at what he says. Again, I saw something meaningless under the sun. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. Solomon is describing a person who has become self-sufficient. He needs no one. He's got enough wealth to completely take care of himself. He's in need of nothing, and he needs no one. You'd be surprised how many people want to live that way. You know, the idea of being self-sufficient, we kind of all like the idea, don't we? Who in here enjoys needing somebody's help? Nobody raised their hand. Because we all desire to be self-sufficient. I don't want to be a burden to people. That's how we say it. I don't want to be a burden to anyone. I want to be able to take care of myself. There's only one problem with it. It's pretty lonely. I don't know any alone people who are happy. How do we overcome this? By building partnerships in life. Solomon actually deals with this one. He saw this lonely guy who had everything he needed. He had worked hard. He worked so hard he didn't even have a family. And now he's completely self-sufficient. But he's not happy. And we overcome it by building partners. Look at what Solomon went on to write. He said, 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they will sleep. They will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? I'm figuring that out. Cherry's out of town this weekend. Yeah, I know what some of you are thinking. I let my dog in the bed. I did not. Dogs sleep on the floor. They do not sleep on the bed in my house. In my house. You just throw on another blanket. That's how you do it. Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. And a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Solomon is saying, listen, being self-sufficient isn't all it's cracked up to be. You might pull it off, but you're not going to be happy. You're going to be alone. So the best thing to do is to build partnerships in your life. Let people in. Not so what a lot of us do is we let people in to help them because we think we're better than them anyway, right? We don't say it that way, we just behave it that way. And so what happens is I let someone in because I want to be a help to them. Wise people understand they need people too. They need people in their life. They need partners. I did a quick check of some of the most famous partnerships in the world. Just quick. Wilbur and Orville Wright, they partnered together and they created the plane. Wasn't just one of them, it was 2 of them working together. Larry Page and Sergey Brin. You know what they created? You use it every day. Google. The 2 of them created together. Not just one of them, 2 of them. It took both of them to pull it off. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. You know what they created, right? They created the Apple. Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph. You know what they created? Netflix. You use it every day. It took both of them to pull it off. Ben Cohen, Jerry Greenfield. You know what they created? Ben and Jerry's ice cream, people. I mean, can you imagine what the world would be like if we just had Ben's ice cream or Jerry's ice cream? It's Ben and Jerry's ice cream. Partnerships can do things that people alone can't do. And it's better. You got to let people in your life. That's why we ask you to be in groups, join people. People come to church, they come in, they sit down in a chair, they hope nobody speaks to them. They're not going to speak to anyone. As soon as church lets out, they squeak back out the door. Listen, you may have gotten some godly wisdom, but you're alone and not happy. It's because we need partners. We need partners. The last thing that he tells us is a roadblock to happiness in our life is stubbornness. Notice what he says, better a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who no longer knows how to heed a warning. The youth may have come from prison to the kingship, or he may have been born in poverty within his kingdom. I saw that all who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth, the king's successor. There was no end to all the people who were before them, but those who came later were not pleased with the successor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Solomon is describing this process of there's a person, a king. He's a somebody. He rose to the most powerful position in the kingdom. He is somebody. But he quit listening. He quit learning. He had arrived. And because he quit listening and because he quit learning, people grew unhappy with the king. So there's this person, maybe they were even in prison, the underdog of the story, who begins to gather a following, and this person becomes popular within the kingdom, and they become so popular that one day they rise to take the position of the king. And the cycle starts all over again. Because the new king becomes stubborn and is unwilling to listen to other people, unwilling to learn from others. This doesn't just happen in kingdoms and politics. This happens in our lives. We reach the place where we think we know. And no one can teach us. No one can tell us it's different. No one can explain to me that I should see it a different way or that I should take into account some more information. No, we've made our mind up. I know. It's called stubbornness. And stubborn people are not happy people. Do me a favor. Think of your favorite stubborn person in your life right now. Hopefully you're not married to them. Think of the most stubborn person in your life right now. You got them? Do you got them? Are they happy? Stubborn people are happy. They're proud, they're arrogant, but they're not happy. They may even be successful because they're really good at what they do. Stubborn people aren't happy people. Stubbornness is a roadblock to happiness. If you and I are going to overcome this, we must remain humble and teachable in our lives. Paul said it this way in Philippians, don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interest, but take an interest in others too. And then he says something real interesting. He says, you must have the same attitude that Jesus Christ had. What was that? When he appeared in human form, which is what you and I are, right? Human form. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God. That sounds like happiness. You and I, we all want to be happy. We all want to have happy lives. And Solomon in this chapter has laid out 4 things that get in the way of you and I being happy. What you and I have to do is decide which one applies to us. Which one is it that I'm ignoring in my life? And then if you and I join God in pushing back against that, He brings happiness into our life as we follow Him. Let's pray together. Father, your word has said so much to us this morning, probably speaking to each of us in different ways, because, Lord, all of us have different things going on in our lives. Some of us can touch the oppressed, but for whatever reason, we're not. And we're not experiencing the happiness that could come from that. Lord, some of us, Lord, we are motivated to do all kinds of things, but our motivation is actually what's getting in the way. Lord, some of us just want to be self-sufficient, and that's getting in the way. Some of us, Lord, we're just stubborn, and it's getting in the way. Father, would you speak to us? Reveal to us what we need to do to move closer to you, to receive the blessings that you have for us that come through a relationship with Jesus Christ. Lord, show us how all of this works. Father, we pray it in Jesus' name.